Good morning, everybody. Dr. Jamie Staniseff from the Higher Learning Commission is in the waiting room right now. I have our liaison, Scott Morgan, and Comptroller Rhonda Labatt are also on the call. And so I will admit Jamie into the meeting, and she'll do her best to talk about the issue at hand. I believe she's in there. Dr. Staniseff?
Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing okay.
I'm just checking the mic to make sure that people can hear. Volume.
I can hear you.
I think it's already up as high as it'll go.
That's going to cause an echo.
Oh, well.
It's a Mac. I don't know Mac. What you need to do is transfer the...
There, it works.
Mike? Dr. Staniseff?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Jamie, can you talk some more?
Sure. Absolutely. Can you hear me now? Maybe if I could just a little bit closer to me, get my microphone a little bit closer to me. How about now? Is that a little better? Okay. I'll just keep it a little closer.
Rhonda, Scott, and Vince, you want to mute your mic so it doesn't interrupt? That'd be great. Okay, Jamie, most of the council are here in chambers as well as a few. Sorry. All of the council members are here with the exception of a few. There are some guests as well, and then there are some personnel from the college that are either on the video or sitting next to me. So if you want to go ahead and do your thing.
Sure. Hang on. I want to share my screen because I have a short little PowerPoint that's going to help me explain what I'm going to explain. Oh, it's showing that I don't have permission to share my screen.
I will allow that, right? Now you should be able to.
So I'm Jamie Stanessa, and I'm a Vice President for Accreditation Relations at the Higher Learning Commission, and I am the VP Liaison to Sisseton-Wahpeton College. And we say that with great pleasure. It's been a pleasure to work with President Azure and his staff over the last couple of years. President Azure asked me to come and talk to the council and any guests who might be here today about the accreditation relationship, what's expected. And I thought I would start back, not knowing exactly what the audience is or what the knowledge is. If this is review or if it appears to be pedantic, I apologize. I'm just going to start back to explain a little bit more about how we operate and why we do what we do. We are recognized by the Department of Education as an institutional accreditor. We accredit 960 plus institutions throughout the country, mostly located in 19 states. And Sisseton-Wahpeton College, again, is one of those 963 institutions that we accredit. We are, again, recognized by the Department of Education as an institutional accreditor. We are actually undergoing our own review and our own recognition process now. We have to undertake the same kind of thing that you all do, that the college does, to be recognized in this environment. And what that means is that the institution, the Department of Education looks at how we implement the list of things they put down for us to evaluate. So one of the requirements is that every single one of the accreditors has a list of things that we are required to have in our standards as set forth by the Department of Education. So we don't make these things up. These are applied evenly and consistently across all of the accreditors, and we all have a set of standards that we apply for our institutions. And the Department of Education reviews those standards, our standards, every 5 years. Our standards are called the criteria for accreditation, and I'm going to get to the criteria specifically that may affect the problem that you're facing now, or the conflict that you have that you are considering now. We also have what are called a set of assumed practices as well as some obligations for membership. We are a membership organization. We're a voluntary organization. Institutions can resign at any time. It's voluntary, and it must be voluntary. That said, accreditation is the gateway to federal funding and in many cases to state funding and other sources as well. So it's not something that's taken lightly. Under those assumed practices, an assumed practice, and I'm just going to read you from our website what an assumed practice is so you understand what this means. These are foundational to the core of what we do, the criteria for accreditation, as well as the core components, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Assumed practices are a set of practices that are shared by institutions of higher education in the United States. And unlike the criteria for accreditation, these assumed practices are generally matters to be determined as facts rather than as matters requiring professional judgment, and they're not expected to vary by institutional mission or context. And every institution is expected to be in compliance with the assumed practices at all times. We consider these assumed practices to be so basic and fundamental to the operation of a higher education entity that they don't even monitor regular evaluation. We consider them so fundamental, and our expectation that these things are in place at any time. The elements that may be at play here for you, and again, you have to evaluate the situation that you find yourself in, is in the assumed practice A, which is around integrity, ethical responsibility, ethical and responsible conduct. It's no accident that A is the one around integrity and ethical responsible conduct. It's our assumption that many other things in the institution flow from this level of integrity. And I'm just going to read a couple of these for you here today. These include, number one, the institution has a conflict of interest policy that ensures that the governing board and the senior administration personnel act in the best interest of the institution. And again, this aligns with state and federal law, nonprofit law as well. Number two is that the institution has an ethics policy for faculty and staff regarding conflict of interest, nepotism, recruitment, admissions, financial aid, privacy of personal information, and contracting. And again, this is to protect the integrity of the institution against outside influences in its hiring practices and its contractual relationships and its superordinate entity relationships or other relationships that it may have in its governing board or in outside entities. The third assumed practice under integrity is that the institution provides its students, administrators, faculty, and staff with policies and procedures informing of their rights and responsibilities within the institution. Again, these go to the federally required EEOC guidelines. They go to FERPA. They go to HIPAA. All those federal regulations, but they also going to have a standard set of practices and policies in place that the institution is following on a regular basis. And again, we consider this to be really fundamental to the operation of a strong institution. And then finally, number 9 under integrity is that the governing board has the authority to approve an annual budget and to engage and dismiss the executive officer. So this is the fundamental role of a governing board of the institution. Again, this is aligned with state law as well as federal law around the operation of nonprofit entities. And again, it's our assumption and the department's assumption that institutions are following these practices, and that this is really the primary responsibility of the governing board is to offer an annual budget and to engage and dismiss in the executive officer. So to evaluate President Azure. It's not the board's responsibility to get involved in personnel issues or to micromanage activities that are happening on a campus. And again, this complies with federal law in this area and state law in this area. So here's what the evaluators come out and they look at. So those assumed practices sit in the background of the criteria for accreditation, and the criteria for accreditation are those standards against which the institution is evaluated for being in compliance and being qualified to have accreditation with the Higher Learning Commission, again, through the standards set down for us by the Department of Education. And again, just to take a look at core component 2C, and again, we're in criterion 2, which is integrity, ethical, and responsibility. And these are the criteria for accreditation. All of this is set forth on our website if you want to look at it later in more detail. So criterion 2 says that the institution acts with integrity, its conduct is ethical and responsible. And core component 2C, there are 5 core components underneath this that are described. Core component 2C is really about the governing board, and it states that the governing board of the institution is autonomous to make decisions in the best interest of the institution in compliance with board policies and to ensure the institution's integrity. So if you unpack that a little bit, it means that the governing board is autonomous, it stands alone as a self-perpetuating entity, and it's operating in the best interest of the institution, and it's got policies that it's following to ensure the integrity of that institution. So when I say best interest and you'll see this played out in the subcomponents under the core component, kind of what this means and how it plays out. So these are some of the things that would outline our expectations around what that means to be in compliance with 2C. And one would be about board training, that the governing board is trained and knowledgeable and it makes informed decisions with respect to the institution's financial and academic policies and practices, and it meets its legal and fiduciary responsibilities. Again, one of the primary responsibilities of the board is that legal and fiduciary responsibility. Secondly, the governing board's deliberations will reflect the priorities and preserve and enhance the institution. Is it okay? Is it okay there? All right. So the governing board is reflecting the priorities of the institution. These are institutional priorities that are set down through a strategic planning process. They're priorities that are set down in a financial process. And they're not priorities that are being dictated by outside bodies or superordinate entities or constituents that are not directly involved in the teaching and learning enterprises of the college. Thirdly, the governing board reviews the reasonable and relevant interests of the institution's internal and external constituencies during its decision-making deliberations. So the governing board can review reasonable interests, again, of these stakeholders, but the management of those things has to comply with the policies and procedures that they have in place for making these things public and making these processes for collecting information. This all has to happen with respect to policies and procedures that are in place at the institution. The governing board preserves its independence from undue influence on the part of donors, elected officials, ownership interests, or other external parties. These can be community groups, they could be tribal councils, they could be superordinate entities if an organization was owned by a for-profit company and it was a subsidiary of that. Again, the institution's priorities, its finance, its budget is the responsibility of the board, and its personnel under the president is the responsibility of the board of directors of the independent institution. And then finally, the governing board delegates the day-to-day management of the institution to the institution's administration and expects that the institution's faculty will oversee academic matters. So it's not the board's place to get involved in what's happening in the classroom, and it's not the board's responsibility to be involved in the day-to-day administration of the institution. That's the president's purview as the supervisor, as the person appointed by the board and supervised by the board to run the college, and it's up to the president and his staff to operate independently and to follow their own practices related to student support, to all of those federal guidelines and the employment practices and so forth that they have in place at the college. So that's what I have to say about the way we operate, the expectations laid down for us by the Department of Education, how we have taken that list from the department and develop those into a set of assumed practices as well as criteria for accreditation. So criterion 2 is something that our teams will come in and look at on a periodic basis. And I can tell you that Sisseton-Wahpeton College had a comprehensive evaluation in 2022. It was a mid-cycle review. And they were found to be in compliance with all of those practices in criterion 2 at that time. In fact, the college sailed through its mid-cycle review with no monitoring. It was deemed in good shape. There were some areas of improvement to be addressed, which is not unusual for our colleges in general. Most of those mid-cycle reviews will give some advice to institutions about what they might want to work on in advance of their next evaluation. So that next evaluation is in 6 years on top of 22. So it's in 2028 is the institution's next evaluation with us. That said, the Higher Learning Commission is, and I can get out of this now and stop sharing. The Higher Learning Commission has the authority to apply additional monitoring at any time through various means. This is written into policy, and so our president can assign a monitoring report or send out an advisory visit or a team at any time that it deems that the institution might be in danger of not being in compliance with the criteria for accreditation. So even though it's 6 years, 5.5 years now until the institution is undergoing its next formal evaluation, we do have a policy on the books that allows our president to call for additional monitoring. This does happen occasionally. I will tell you it's not something we want to have happen. Our preferred mode of being is that institutions comply with the criteria for accreditation and stay in compliance for the entire cycle. We get into these situations reluctantly, but it does happen and it will happen. And I would, again, we try to encourage institutions to solve issues that come up internally before it rises to the level where we have to intervene. We prefer not to do that. And finally, I will just say in closing that from our perspective, Sisseton-Wahpeton has been in compliance with the criteria for accreditation. It demonstrated that in its last evaluation. The institution over the last couple of years under President Azur's leadership has had numerous degree programs at the bachelor's level that were approved. These are programs that were not approved previously, and so I think this demonstrates something about the institution's capacity and renewed vigor with President Azur and his staff. We see some improvement there, and I would There's some past history of monitoring that Sisseton-Wahpeton College has with the Higher Learning Commission, including on issues of finance, issues with practices in the business office with student achievement and with the assessment of student learning. And the institution has made great strides. I would hate to see it return to a history of monitoring around issues. So with that, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you, Jamie. I don't know if anybody from the council has a question. And there is Gypsy Wana from Veblen District.
Hi, thank you. I have a few questions based on some questions. On basic different things that we've been told that affect accreditation. So my first question is, does a high rate of staff turnover, either in the offices or the instructors, affect accreditation?
I'm not able to answer that. We don't answer in hypotheticals.
Okay.
Yeah, and it is a high rate of staff turnover would be the business of the organization and the institution. It would not be the business of a different entity.
Okay, I believe that would answer my
turnover. Our interest would be, did the institution follow its practices, its hiring and employment practices, and that's what we would be looking at when we came in. But I can't remark to that in a hypothetical situation.
Okay, thank you. That kind of does answer it. How about, can you just explain to us why accreditation is so important? Like what happens if somebody graduates from a college that is not accredited?
So most accredited institutions, there are some benefits to being accredited. I think the first and foremost for most organizations is the access to Title IV funding for student aid. You have to be accredited, an institution has to be accredited to be eligible, for students to be eligible to receive federal financial aid. Other sorts of federal funding are also tied to accreditation, and that just depends on how you're structured. And many state institutions will also require that an institution be accredited. If you have specialized accreditors, if you've got a state accrediting body for other kinds of education, if you've got specialized programs, again, this affects people who have nursing programs and such, the specialized accreditor will also expect that the institution is also accredited at the institutional level. We're looking at institutional capacity as a Higher Learning Commission entity. We don't look at the program level activity in quite the same detail as the specialized accreditors. And then finally, it's about protecting students as well. So accredited colleges and students who receive credits and receive degrees on transcripts from accredited colleges have a much easier time transferring those credits to other entities. Many schools will not take credits or transcripts from unaccredited institutions. So it's a risk to students who may want to take those credits and transfer them to another college, to a graduate program, to another undergraduate program somewhere else. Lack of accreditation really puts the students at risk.
Okay.
Not that it doesn't happen, but the students are at risk.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any more questions at this time. I don't know if anybody else does.
So you say you're, well, I'm Curtis Bissonette. I'm the tribal secretary. Nice to meet you. And but my question is was there a formal complaint filed with your office? And you work with specifically the Sisseton-Wahpeton College, correct? So I guess that's my question.
I do. We've had several inquiries about the board and about some irregularities in terms of board practice, and frankly about the intrusion of the tribal council and some work related to the board. They have not come through official channels. They have come to us through unofficial channels. When they come through official channels, then we may act on that. I'll just be honest. It's not a threat. I don't know. I don't deal in hypothetical situations, but we are aware of some irregularities in terms of board practice. But it has not come to us through official complaint or third-party comment. Those are the two ways that things come to us. Or it comes to us sometimes through state entities, state bodies, the federal government, FSA. We receive information. The agencies are required to talk to one another, so we receive information from those entities. And sometimes we receive information from the media.
So it's basically just giving you a heads up on what's going on here.
Right, but none of it's come through official channel.
Okay, thank you.
All been things that have come to us through email, through letters, things like that. But we have two official channels, and we respond through those official channels: a third-party comment process and a official complaint process that are posted on our website.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Bill LaRock. I'm a former board of trustee of the college. How important is the articles of incorporation, the charter and the bylaws, and do you look at the autonomy within those legal documents?
We expect that the institution has policy, board bylaws, and that have been approved through a regular practice, through a self-perpetuating board, and that the board is following them, and that they comply with state and federal law. We don't get into the details of the arrangement, but we do expect that institutions are following their own policies and practices, and that boards are operating according to their own policies and practices, and the policies and practices that are in place for the revision of those documents, for the compliance with those documents, and following those documents themselves. So that's what a team would be looking at if it came in to evaluate that. Is it in place? When was it approved? Has it been revised since then? What was the process for revising it? Are there any revisions that might take place in line with the processes set forth for those kinds of things? And is the institution in compliance? Is the board complying with the rules it's set up for itself, for its own governance?
I just have a follow-up question. If you review the charter and the bylaws, if you see it doesn't uphold the autonomy of the board from outside influences, what will you do?
Again, I'm not going to deal in hypotheticals because nothing's come to us officially. If the team coming in sees that the board has not followed its policies, or that it has it's not operating in what the team would think was in the best interests of the college, as required by federal law, state law, the Department of Education, and the Higher Learning Commission, then the institution could face monitoring, could face a sanction, could face a show cause order. I mean, there are lots of different things, and you can read about those things on our website. I don't make statements around hypothetical situations. So, but that's what the team would be looking at, is whether it was in compliance with core component or criteria 2 and core component 2C, and all of those assumed practices that were on those slides.
I do have a question. I've never had to work with the college board before, and so my question is, I don't know if it's in the policies of, with new people coming in, do you do orientation of the policies, the bylaws, and of course the Higher Education Commission?
Yes, we do.
Is this a question?
Oh,
It's Elaine. Okay.
sorry, just anyone really, but, okay, so all these documents are presented on their first meeting where they are able to review these policies?
Well, we try to have a board training or a retreat that would include all of that. So immediately when they first step on, we don't do that. No, it's, overload them with a bunch of papers. But that is an important aspect of it, and probably something that we need to do a better job of when they come in.
Because I would definitely love to see that when it's their first meeting. I know it's a whole bunch of paperwork, but something just be like, here you go, this is something that's very important that you need to know now before our next meeting, that possibly of just.
We do give them a binder that has all that stuff in it, so.
All right, thank you.
Well, if there are no more questions, I can sign off.
I think,
Nice to meet you.
okay.
Well, thank you so much for, actually, we do have one more question. Hold on one second. You can go ahead and sit right here.
Good morning. My name is Heather Larson. I was elected from my district, which is Buffalo Lake, one of the 7 districts. I was elected to represent my district on the Board of Trustees back in July of 2022. And I was never seated by the previous board. And I've also been reelected again, maybe last month in January, for the 4-year term. And I went to the January meeting and the old board refused to seat me again. So I think that's where a lot of these issues are stemming from, is I am not being seated for some reason. So
I think you're as you're getting into the weeds about some of these issues, it's best if I back out. So are there any questions left about the Higher Learning Commission or about our expectations with respect to independent board operation?
So would I need to file go through that official means of communication you were talking about, a complaint that way through HLC?
Can somebody repeat the question? I'm having a hard time hearing here.
Am I supposed to file an official complaint to HLC? I didn't want to go that route, but I am not being seated and I've been elected twice, so I'm unsure of what I'm supposed to do at this point.
She wants to know, Jamie, if she's supposed to file an official complaint because she hasn't been seated onto the board after being elected.
Again, I'm not going to tell people what to do. We are in reactive mode. So we will respond when something official comes through an official process, or we get something more in writing, as opposed to like a media article, or again, information from a state entity or federal entity or from federal financial aid. Again, if something comes in through one of these sources or there's an official complaint filed in our system, I can't make a comment about what individuals should do. I can only comment on how we have the authority to respond if something comes in through one of those channels.
Hi, this is Gypsy again. I have another question. As far as the conflict of interest, if the board has policies and procedures to follow those, you have the criterion, and so that certain criterion has to be met within that, with those policies and procedures as far as conflicts of interest, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so former employees of the college, can they be on the board, or would that be a conflict of interest?
I think it depends on the board's policies. I mean,
Okay.
Without
So-
understanding.
So
you
the
know,
board's
what-
policies would have to determine if that's a conflict of interest, and if it's the board's policies, then then the HLC is, as long as the board has it, then HLC is fine with it, unless they're violating their own
Yeah.
policies.
Well, let me put the caveat on it. I mean, boards are self-perpetuating, and they're meant to be in the interest of the institution, the
Okay.
institution's well-being, of its financial success and its programmatic success. So most boards, when they constitute, will look for a variety of skills and abilities to help the institution and the institution's president with a variety of skills and abilities. So most boards are comprised of people who have a diverse skill set to be able to support the institution. There's nothing prohibiting a board from taking on an employee. A lot of past presidents sometimes serve on the boards of institutions, and they're employees of the institution. That said, the board would want to have some guidelines or some shared understanding about kinds of skills and abilities it was looking for on its self-perpetuating board.
Thank you.
I have a question about,
And we would expect those people would have been appointed through channels that were recognized in the policies, that people will, all the people coming into the board would come into the board through whatever process, regular, standard, and documented and approved process it was for people coming onto a board. So, you know, what are the cycles, what are the terms, how long is someone serving, how were they vetted coming in, those kinds of things. That would be, we would expect that you had policies around those things and that you were following them.
I have a question about, in my district, which is Iacaptapi, other name is Biculi District, our board member is also our district chairperson. She was told by one of the board members that she cannot sit on that board because she's a college student there. Now, I didn't know there was limitations to who can sit on that board because she was elected into that position by Biculi District.
Again, it's the same answer again. Some boards have students sitting on current students sitting on their boards. Some of those students have voting capacity on the board. Some of them are ex officio members and do not have voting privileges. Some institutions do not have students on their board. Again, it goes back to the bylaws. It goes back to the composition of the board and what the institution's bylaws say and how they're following their practices for following those bylaws around the intake, term limit, and end date of board members. So it all goes back to how that independent board has decided to self-perpetuate. And what I mean by self-perpetuate, it's a legal term, but it means that boards perpetuate themselves. So they have this responsibility for watching out for the fiscal responsibility, fiscal capacity of the institution, but they constitute and reconstitute themselves toward that primary purpose. And that's why they have bylaws in place, so that they can continuously self-perpetuate. They can continuously continue to exist to protect the interests of the institution first and foremost.
Good morning. I just have one question. You probably covered this earlier, but I wasn't in here. And just to verify to the people watching and listening that who can complain to HLC and how do they complain to HLC? That is the question.
We have two processes through which people can register comment with us. One is called the third-party comment section, and again, these are posted on our website pretty clearly. Third parties are those entities that are not involved in a direct dispute or are not involved in the institutions. It could be a community group, it could be an outside business, it could be someone unaffected by whatever was happening, affected but not really involved in a dispute or involved in a complaint with the college. The complaint process is reserved, and again, this is described on our website. The complaint process is reserved for people who are in direct contact or work for the institution or are involved in the institution. They're a student at the institution. They're an employee of the institution. So people who are directly affected or directly related to the institution in that regard. If a third-party complaint came in through the complaint, third-party comment came in through the complaint process, we would redirect it into the appropriate channel. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, those are two ways that we take official input about something that might be happening at the Higher Learning Commission.
And how, why can they complain? I mean, what, they can only complain about the schooling part of it or everything else?
We get complaints about all kinds of things. Some of which, and all those complaints are evaluated internally by our Legal and Regulatory Affairs Department in consultation with the staff liaison, because we know probably the most about the institution. And we make a judgment about what the appropriate action is at that time based on the complaint. So for instance, sometimes we get complaints about a student can't get a transcript from an institution. And we will report that back to the institution. But again, some of these things we don't really get involved in. That's between the institution and its students. So we tend to make an evaluation about whether it's related to the institution's compliance with the criteria for accreditation and the assumed practices. So those tend to be the things that we will get involved in some way, shape, or form. And again, I'm not going to get into a lot of hypotheticals about what might happen because we don't do that until there's something in front of us.
Go ahead, Bill.
You know, tribes are sovereign. But in order to get accreditation of a college, you have to go by HLC policies, procedures, and things like that. So in this case, the whole Board of Trustees was removed by the Tribal Council. And in my opinion, I was a board member, I feel it was not justified to be removed like that. So it's important to follow HLCs in order to maintain the college accreditation. And so I just want the Tribal Council to know that separation is definitely defined. And in order to maintain the accreditation of the college, we need to have good, solid articles of incorporation, bylaws, policies, in order to maintain that accreditation. As a former Board of Trustees, we maintain that accreditation. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. No more questions. I guess we can wrap it up.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. DeStanisa.
Welcome. Now,
so from this presentation and from my understanding, the main conflict of this whole situation, does it state in the bylaws specifically that students or previous staff say that they cannot be on the board?
No, it does not.
Okay, so I'm just thinking, are we able to board, since it doesn't say in the bylaws? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
It does say in the bylaws that a student does not have voting rights.
Okay, so for future references then, would we want to tell Bikuli that you can be on the board, you let the district know that you can be on the board, but you won't have a voting right?
Can I interrupt?
I don't think that's specified, though. I mean, because number one, you're a board member from your district. and then you can also be a student. So, I mean, if we have to solve that, it has to be done in the bylaws.
So it specifies it in the
What-
bylaws?
In the bylaws, what it states is that there is a student representative, the president of the student body, who is a member of the Board of Trustees who does not have voting rights. It does not suggest that if you're a student and you're voted in,
Okay, then.
that you can't be on the board.
Okay, so that should have been clarified.
That's
your
that's
statement.
clear, yes.
Okay.
Dr. Johnson?
Just what he was saying is that I was going to clarify that if you're elected as the student body president or whoever they seat on that board, then that person does or does not have voting rights. But a person that's coming as an elected board would have all voting rights, due voting rights. And nowhere in there does it say anything about former employees. As a student of that college, and that was my first degree, was an AA from Washington College. I sat on the board during that time.
Susie?
I have a question for Bill LaRock. At one time, weren't you a student and you sat on that board also? No. Thank you.
And respond to your question about your current board member, our former board member, I informed her that may be a conflict of interest and we need to find out if a student can be on the board. According to the current bylaws, a student can be on the board through what Dr. Asher said, and they have no voting rights according to the bylaws and articles of incorporation. So we did not know she was a student also, and she's also on the board. We just found out about that, and that's a conflict of interest.
Go ahead.
So, I guess she answered my question that there was no formal complaint. But I think in talking with you at that meeting that night, Dr. Azure, that you told me that there was a complaint filed with HLC and our accreditation is in, and you were waving a paper around at me because I asked you if it was in black and white. So what was that you were waving at me?
I don't recall what I was waving at you, but in terms of there has not been a formal complaint. You asked if the college was the college's accreditation was in jeopardy, and if I was waving something around, it was the document that the Higher Learning Commission sent to us, revealing what Dr. Stanisa had said is that we just we just went through a formal comprehensive visit, and we sailed through with flying colors. So we were not in jeopardy, and that's what the formal resolution or the motion that was made was written, saying that the college board of trustees was dissolved because of accreditation concerns. But that is not what Dion was saying. That she said, and this is on video, that we don't feel that the college's accreditation process is that weak, and I'm paraphrasing and I'm not doing a very good job of it, but that the issue at hand was the severance, the emergency meeting that was called about the severance pay being put into escrow. And therefore, the reason that the college board of trustees was dissolved was not a valid reason. The reason could have been if our accreditation was in jeopardy. But as you heard, it was not in jeopardy. It is in jeopardy now. Because if somebody files a complaint frankly, in all due respect, the council doesn't have to answer to it. The college does. So we have to try to figure out a way that this won't happen again. And that's the concern, is that if we can't agree here, how are we going to make sure that this doesn't happen again? You know, are our bylaws going to be followed? Or is the charter going to be followed? Or are we just going to use that document as, you know, a check mark for the Higher Learning Commission's accreditation process?
So, so from my understanding, the charter from the college, we're the board that approves that, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it was, the council did step in the past also. And, I think that it was.
With all due
for some-
respect, Curtis, I don't think we're talking about the past. I think we're talking about right now. What happened in the
Well,
past is...
just let me finish first. I still have the floor, okay? So then I can explain to you what happened. So when the college did step in the past, it was for financial stuff that was on the college. And they did put sanctions on the college, but our accreditation was never in jeopardy. We just had sanctions we had to follow, and it was never in jeopardy. But by you saying that, that's dangerous. I mean, you putting misinformation out there, it's dangerous. But you said that to me that night. You were waving a paper around at me. I can vouch because she was in the room because I let her get her stuff. And you were saying, yeah, it's right here. It's right here. Because I asked you if it was in black and white, and that's what you said to me, but you never let me look at that paper. So that's what I'm saying, is that we had every right to step in here and do what we did. And then if there's no formal complaint with HLC, then this is really our issue. There is no formal complaint. And that's what I wanted to ask her, HLC, because that's what you're saying, is that there's a complaint. There's no formal complaint made to them. Thank you.
Gypsy.
Thank you. What I heard Dr. Stanislaw say is that she doesn't want to see us going back into monitoring. And what's happening now, and if there's a formal complaint, that's what could possibly happen. We'll get into the monitoring situation, which obviously leads towards, you know, which is part of the accreditation process. Does that sound fairly accurate? I mean, that's what I heard. If we're doing anything, we could get sanctioned, we can get monitored, but that's all part of the accreditation. Now, this is, when we made this, when this motion happened and all of this happened in the first go-round, Buffalo Lake said they had an election to seat their newly elected college representative. And from what I understand, with the board and the policies, it's the college board, the board of trustees, to have their own policies, procedures, and the charter that explains how a board member is removed. And the one that was in there didn't have a valid reason for removal, so the board supported her staying on that board. Then we had all the trouble with, then the districts got involved and it went to DCA and all the districts making motions, et cetera, to support the new one. So when the motion was made to dissolve the board of trustees, and yeah, I voted yes on that at that time too, but I made and maybe it was a wrong point to make, but either way, even if I voted no, it would have still passed because everybody else voted yes. The thing is, I said, why are we getting involved in this? Because a lot of people like to say that the board has the council has the ultimate authority. Council can do this because we're council. We're sovereign, we're council, we can do it. And I say, just because we can do it doesn't mean we should, and it doesn't mean it's right. Now, we should not have, and when I said I voted yes, I was like, well, gee, we might as well get rid of all the other boards then. If we're gonna overstep and get involved in all the other things where we delegate that authority to that board, then we might as well get rid of every other board then, which means we should dissolve the TZ board, we should dissolve the housing board, because each of those boards, by their charters or whatever it is, they govern who's on their board, when they're on the board, when their terms end, how they're removed. And we don't do anything about that. They inform us, they inform our districts when there's an opening, when that position is vacated. So, when that happened, and I said, okay, great, we're gonna suspend and dissolve that board, let's amend the charter, let's amend the bylaws and make it better. But instead of making it better and taking our time and getting district and community input and ensuring that we could improve it, it was only changed for 2 lines to allow the districts to put whoever they want on there whenever they want. And so that's what was changed, something in the charter to make it say that and something in the bylaws to make it say that. I don't agree with either one of those. And it did create a lot of tension, and we should not have made that motion. There was a motion on November 1st, motion number 36, where they wanted that it was for council to recognize the district who their rep was. And it was stated at that time that we wouldn't, council's not getting involved, we're just saying that we know Buffalo Lake, this is their person. So they took that and used that motion to go forward with everything else. And then the next day is when the college board was dissolved with motion number 89 on November 2nd. And after reviewing the resolution that was passed, I do not believe that everything in that resolution is accurate. That's all.
Okay, we have another meeting, so we'll wrap this up, but I think the issue here it should have been a court issue. I mean, I don't think tribal council probably should have intervened, you know what I mean? I think this is why we have laws and rules, so that they can be challenged in the court of law and figured out in the court of law. So going forward, I guess that's a lesson that we need to learn going forward, but also, this body's primary responsibility is legislation and law. And we talked about that a little bit already. You have businesses. As a tribe, how much have we progressed and grew in the last 20 years without any kind of laws changing or updating? So again, I want to stress that to all of you as tribal council, that we need to take a look at all those codes and really go and update all of that. Because there's some codes in there that are 40 years old that need updating. And I think some of the court issues that are happening today are because of things not being updated, or they can't charge a person because it doesn't specifically state what's going on in our communities today. So with that being said, I just thank everybody, and then
Chairman,
we'll get done.
I understand I'm a tribal member, I'm an elder, and I'm a veteran, and this is a serious issue the council needs to know. Please let me talk. The bylaws and articles incorporated in college have been in effect since 1966. It never had this issue come up, interference from the tribal council. They all respected it previously. The question I brought up about the autonomy, the way you council rewrote, yes, Curtis, I want you to understand this too, because you were on the ex officio of the college. Your attendance was very poor, and you voted to remove the whole council. I don't want to make this political. I just want to make this issue that the way you changed the charter and the bylaws right now, and Gypsy recognizes it, you will not be accredited. You allowed the outside political influence districts to be on, to remove a board member of the college at any time. And HLC will not approve that. I just want you to know, the former board, we never jeopardized the college accreditation. We, matter of fact, improved it. We got it maintained. We were never in conflict with the president on any decisions. And concerning the escrow, the finances, escrow payments for employees is legal. We're in the process of maintaining. The president brought all these accomplishments to the college. I understand, you know, we never put our accreditation in jeopardy. You as a tribal council have done that now. You did not invite us to provide defense for our removal. And that's getting into our due process. And we were elected also. But we do have a chance to like Gypsy said, to correct it. Let's correct it. Put the original board back in. We did nothing wrong. Matter of fact, we all are tribal elders. You got 3 of us on there with advanced degrees. Over 20 years experience being on board in colleges. I was on the University of Minnesota Board of Regents as a student representative. So I know, I was a student there. I was an instructor at the college. That is very important to me. Please, as our leaders, please understand there's a chance to make amends. Please do it on behalf of us tribal elders, the community, the students. That's why I'm up here. A lot of people won't come up and talk to you guys. They're afraid that they get fired. I'm retired. I got 2 major illnesses, end-stage cancer, and I'm on dialysis. And your conduct, Secretary, interrupting an official board meeting the way you guys did was unacceptable to us. But let's put that under the rug. Let's do positive things. Let's do things for the college. This president, he was going to be hired by Haskell University. We maintained him here to do all these good things for our college. So please, thank you very much for letting me talk. And I hope you really reconsider my recommendation to reconsider changing those bylaws, because currently, if the president has to administer the college, why that HLC will be in here if you really look at that, because it does allow for outside political influences from the districts. Thank you.
Thank you for that information. Also, thank you for the accomplishments and the improvements in the college. Of course, I would like to say thank you for the, you know, the students and our future students. But what I would like to see is, I know they're talking about the bylaws and how we need to follow the bylaws, and then from clarifying that students can make a vote on it, and clarifying that there is nothing against previous staff, I would encourage that the new board and that we push to everyone to understand these policies. And moving forward, I understand the districts are already having votes or elections for the new college boards, which we hope to see, and we just encourage that we wouldn't have to be involved as long as the board follows the bylaws and policies moving forward. So that's all I just would like to say, but thank you for coming. Thank you for everyone attending, also for everyone viewing, so we all understand the process and what's in these bylaws and policies. So I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.